the last group really created a scene, so hope that we can continue the energy.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what made you interested in the sustainable food systems?
Sure. In a way, my background's interesting, and in a way, it's not interesting at all. I've only ever done environmental science. I knew from a young age, probably 14, 15, this was what I wanted to do, and spent my studies studying biological systems, my traditional academic studies, studied in kind of a post-grad scenario, environmental impact assessment. I'm talking 30 years ago, so at this time it was all about a desperate move to conserve, preserve, so environmental impact assessment was really, really a strong focus. In between 30 years ago and today, interestingly, now all I do is environmental impact assessment, but in the meantime went through a whole bunch of learning. I worked on technologies, environmental technologies, I worked on environmental policy, I worked for governments, I worked for public sector, private sector, so been around the block a few times, seen a lot, and I came back to food systems, and I think everyone here probably is aware that food systems for the first time was a little bit on the agenda in COP in Egypt, and we knew we were not doing enough. Food systems are responsible for at least a third of our global emissions, if not more, if you look at it holistically. And to this year, this COP, food is one of the things at the top of the agenda, right? So you're hearing a lot about food system and food system transformation. And my personal interest, I think from a biological system point of view, is obviously very easily relatable to agri-food systems, right? We grow food from the earth. We grow food from natural resources. So that whole natural resource management to me is extremely fascinating.
Thank you. And so I know we don't have a lot of time. This is a big question, but can you provide a short overview of then what are the key challenges in the agri-food sector currently?
So really hard to sum up what the key challenges are and put it into a few points. However, I think we all know that there's a population issue on our planet. We know that feeding that population sustainably is extremely difficult. And when I say sustainably, it's not just about natural resource use for the planet, but also about healthy, nutritional food as well. So we need to dig down. We're dealing with climate change impacts at the same time. So I would say a key focus is understanding our natural systems, including climate change adaptation, to understand how do we work with climate change. Obviously, we need to mitigate it, but how do we work with the adaptations to know where, how, and when we should be producing food in a sustainable way to feed a 10 billion population?
So that brings us to what is Foundation Earth and what's its mission?
So Foundation Earth the concept of Foundation Earth started probably around 6 years ago, where actors in the food system were saying, do we even know what producing food sustainably is? Can we even define that? Who's defining that? Who is out there saying what is sustainable, what is not sustainable? We eat food 3 times a day on average, right? So we're not talking about buying a washing machine, buying a car, deciding if I fly somewhere, not fly somewhere. We're talking about something that's a part of every single human being on this planet's life in a very, very impactful way. Food is spiritual, food is emotional, food is cultural. So we're talking about a system that is so integral to everything we do. And the idea was, the concept is, how are we actually defining what's sustainable in the food system or not? Do we even know? When we go and make choices as citizens, do we have any confidence at all about what we're being told, about what's green, what's bio, what's eco, what's sustainable? And I'm sure everyone here is aware that there is total and utter confusion out there when you're trying to buy food. And this is obviously applicable to other sectors when you're trying to buy clothes, etc. We're focusing on the food system at Foundation Earth in particular. But there is a lot of confusion when you're purchasing food, understanding food, to feel like, am I making good choices? And I say that as an environmental professional who's very educated on this stuff. It's confusing, it's hard. So we intended to set up an independent body that was driving a framework and a science-based, very independent, rigorously independent assessment of environmental impact of food, and to do that at a geographical level that could harmonize and have an understandable single system. That if you travel from wherever you came from to Dubai, you understand the same system. Because a lot of times right now you travel, and as a citizen, as a consumer, and what was said in one country is completely different in another, and you have no understanding of that. If you compare that, for example, to medicine, if you come to Dubai, you have a headache, and you go to the local pharmacy, you go and buy ibuprofen, you totally trust that it says it's ibuprofen because it says so on the pack, right? You believe there's a system behind that someone's checking and verifying. If it says ibuprofen, it's ibuprofen. I don't need to worry. And that's what we set out to do.
And I think it's especially hard for the consumers. Like I'm going to buy food and groceries a couple of times a week, and even I'm struggling with understanding what's out there. And we have a lot of young people here with us today, so especially for them. So can we dig a bit deeper on how your food labeling system works?
Absolutely. So what are the first principles we set out to do? Number one, a harmonized system. Harmonized means it's understandable and universal across the world because we work on global food supply chains. We don't work on regionalized supply chains, for better or for worse. I think a lot of us would like to prefer to say we only have access, and wouldn't it be great if we could promote local regional food? But even that local regional food, a lot of it uses ingredients that have been imported from all over the world. So number one principle is it needs to be universal, it needs to be a standard. Number two, it needs to be credible. You need to trust it, so it needs to be rigorously independent. And number three, we work on data quality. Data matters. So we look at 16 environmental indicators. There's a lot of talk out there about carbon emissions, what's your carbon rating, what's your carbon score, you know, and carbon, particularly in any sector, to be very honest, but in the food system, who cares if your carbon emission is low if the food came from contaminated water or contaminated soil? If you're not measuring the holistic environmental impact, you're missing out on some pretty important information that seriously affects that food product that you're actually putting in your body. Like I said, it's not a washing machine where it does not affect your health. So this also obviously includes things like biodiversity, land use, right? We know how important biodiversity is to the food we eat. Without biodiversity, we won't have food. So you need to be measuring that. What is the environmental impact and biodiversity impact of the food we're eating? So 16 environmental indicators. So you have a holistic vision about the entire life cycle. So from we say cradle to grave. So from the farm, not even to the fork, past the fork. What happens to the waste after we take off the packaging, even throw away whatever leftover food there is, the entire life cycle, to have a whole view of that environmental impact.
Can you give us some concrete examples on how this food labeling system helping either the consumers or like the decision makers along the food supply chain?
Yeah, what's really exciting, obviously there's a clear benefit for consumers, right? So any citizen that buys food, and that's an interesting demographic because who buys food? I honestly think maybe between 7 and 90 years old is actively buying food. We're talking every culture, every gender, every race. We're talking about everyone practically. So it's really interesting when you think about consumer insights, consumer behavior. You know, my 80-year-old mother shops very differently to I do. My 14-year-old daughter shops very differently to I do. So it has to work for all consumers to understand it. That's very, very important. It has to be simplified enough where consumers can make a trusted 2-second decision. No one wants to do a PhD thesis every time they go to the supermarket. So it has to be quick and easy to understand. But what's really, really exciting about what we're doing is this is not just useful for consumer purchasing decisions. The data that we're generating, the intelligence that we're generating is helping every single actor from the farm all the way up to the supermarket shelf or the restaurant choice. Every actor in there, there's buying and selling going on where people can use this data and intelligence to make a decision, what supplier do I want to use for my final product?
Yeah, as we are on the island stage, I'd like to emphasize how this system is important for islands who, like one of the issues is waste management and also on like the access on and use of more and more local products. And you were mentioning to me before that example with Ireland, if you can share
So
that.
because we're looking at the whole holistic vision of environmental impact, on an island you have very, very limited resources, right? So when you talk not just about how do you manage your waste, but how do you manage your water, how do you manage your land use impact, how do you make the best out of those resources? How do you know what to grow, when to grow it, where to grow it? The data, when you study this, and the knowledge trends and the insights that you get, can help point to decisions where maybe things need to be changed, right? I mentioned before climate change adaptation. It's given food companies, national governments that we work with, insights on maybe we need to think differently about where we're growing, what kind of habitats we need to put money into, invest into, so that there's better biodiversity, to have better yields and growing more healthy, sustainable food. How do we need to take care of the soil? That's particularly relevant for island nations who have very limited resources and can have a much better vision of what food are they producing, how could they do it more efficiently and more sustainably.
And as a final question, I'm curious, like, where is this food labeling system is available currently?
So primarily right now it's available to anyone in the world, and we're having international interest growing now. We're started as a small non-for-profit, so resources are limited. We primarily had growth in UK and Europe, and now after 3 years it's really starting to have more of an international interest. So we've had interest from Japan, Australia, South Africa, South America, North America. That interest is growing. Labels on food products you can see in UK and Europe, and with more and more food companies coming on board from an international level, you'll start to see labels outside of UK and Europe shortly.
Thank you. Thank you for being us here with.
Thank you. I'll be around if anyone has any questions. I'd love to answer questions. Particularly interested to know what young people think of this. You guys are very savvy shoppers, so love to have your insights. Love to know what you guys feel are your rights as humans. Do you have a right to know what's in your food? Does it matter to you? Would you make decisions based on environmental impact? Come share with me.
Thank you.